Today on the breakdown, we are going to go over black codes. Now, black codes were basically rules and regulations and things that they put in for post slavery to still hold black people down. But before I get into the black codes, I'm going to touch on the slave codes because they were very identical. And these people didn't even have like the audacity or cleverness to even try to change the name. You went from slave codes to black codes. Now, what were the slave codes? They were basically laws, legislations, codes that the southern states or basically any slave owner came up with to make sure that the slaves did not get any power. Like they already saw them as subhuman property, beasts, things of that nature. They didn't want them to gain any power. So things that they came up with was, well, you can't get married, you can't read or write, you can't own property, you can't, God forbid, don't you ever get any relationship with someone who's not black, right? And so they had all these rules and regulations for the slaves so that you couldn't what was another one? You can't congregate, you can't get in a group of people, so you can't assemble without a white person involved. So if you have a group of more than 3 and a white person ain't there, you're gonna get in some trouble because what do they think you're gonna do? Oh, they're probably planning to rebel or something like that. So that was what the slave codes were. There's a lot more, but that's just what I'm gonna touch with. Then we had the Civil War. Now we always know the Civil War came. It was in 1861 to 1865. 500,000 people killed, about 600,000 people were killed. And it was North versus the South. The North was becoming more industrialized and using less. They were farming less, and the South was farming more. And there's the misconception that the battle was strictly for slavery. So the Civil War was going on. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was basically saying that, to end slavery. Now, this obviously infuriated the South, and eventually the war ended up being concluded. And so slavery was supposed to have been abolished, right? And we know today that just because something is written down in law or something is written down in the books and it's immoral and it's something they're not supposed to be doing, does not necessarily mean that it has stopped. So the black codes, they came out, basically the South was trying to revamp and continue the things that they were doing that they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. So instead of saying that black people can't get married anymore, they're going to say, well, black people can get married, but you better not marry anyone outside your race. And if you do marry somebody outside of your race, it is a felony charge of what? Life in prison. Imagine that today with how the world is, that if you marry somebody outside your race, you can get put in jail for life in prison. And speaking of prison in the law, if you were in court, you could not testify against a white person as a black person. You could only testify against another black person. So if you're in court and a white person says he did this, well, hey, it's ugly. You're going to go to jail. A lot like some of the things that we deal with today. So I'm going to touch on this, is that these black codes are important because we still deal with some of these issues today. We don't always have a jury of our peers. We're not always treated the same, and we should just keep that in mind. Another one of the black codes was that if you had to have a job, right? So today, if you're unemployed, that's more or less something that you have to deal with. Back in the day, in this time, if you were black and you didn't have a job, you could be fined, put in jail, or so if let's say you were fined. If you were fined and someone a white person came and paid your fine, then you would have to then go work for them. Think about that. You don't have a job, so they fine you, knowing you can't pay that fine. So then you now have to go work for that person without gaining wages. What is that? Slavery. Now, the first people to come up with the black codes was Mississippi. Mississippi being in the South, it was Mississippi, then it was South Carolina, and eventually everyone kind of came up with their own black code. So another thing, one of the black codes is that you can't carry weapons, right? From anywhere from machete to obviously a firearm. You can't carry it. The only thing you're supposed to be having is gardening tools. Speaking of gardening tools, the only jobs that black people could have was working in the farm or working as like a helper in the house. Just think about the things that these are laws, these are actual statutes that they had. Like, this isn't just, oh, hey, we just going, this is what we, no, this is what the entire region of the country was doing. And it was, although that slavery was abolished, just like in the law, it says that all men are supposed to be treated equally. That's not done today. Even though it says it, people are going to do what they want to do at the end of the day unless you enforce it. And all this was going on, and it didn't really get interrupted. I wouldn't say it ever really stopped, but it didn't really get interrupted until the Civil Rights Act of 1866 declared that all male persons born in the United States to be citizens without the distinction of race, color. Basically, everyone, should be treated equally. And even though that was enacted, right, mind you, Andrew Johnson, right, vice president under President Abraham Lincoln, who had been assassinated, he vetoed this legislation, but was overturned, and things kind of got better. But we all know the Jim Crow laws came, and it wasn't until the civil rights movement came back up. It wasn't until the civil rights movement of 1964, nearly 100 years later, just prohibits discrimination basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, treating everybody equally. And it took that long, and even still today, progress has not been moving very quickly, and it's because of how our nation and how our country, was started. If you plant, if you plant something on some bad soil, it's gonna grow a bad product, right? So when we look at how things were started and how things had come to be, you got to think of where it came from. All right. So when we have people saying things like, oh, well, black people should just get over these things, and, oh, you guys should do this and that and other, understand that, yes, we do have a part to play, but understand there's a system that had been created for 400 years of slavery. This wasn't a decade. This wasn't 20 years. It was 400 years of slavery, systematic process in which to hold a certain amount of people down, and how it's now come to today in 2021, 2020, in the modern century. It doesn't look like it's slowing down. Yeah, we had a lot going on, within the last 4 years, but honestly, we have strides to go, and we need to do it.